Congresswoman Karen Bass has raked in more than $1 million since announcing she's running to be mayor of Los Angeles. And if elected, the former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus would become the first black woman to lead the nation's second largest city. I had a chance to sit down with Bass on her home turf to talk about what spurred her decision to run. Watch. Congresswoman Karen Bass, thank you very much for coming back to the Sunday Show.
Thank you for coming to Los Angeles.
I want to start this conversation by reading a quote back to you from Sylvia Castillo.
Oh.
She said in an interview in the LA Times last year, when you were under consideration for vice president, she says about you, she stumbles into situations where they lift her into leadership. She truly does what she has to do in terms of the work. And then it seems that circumstances elevate her to a place where people notice and say, yeah, that's who we want. I read that to you because, to my mind, I saw you being a member of Congress as someone who could potentially be the next Speaker of the House. And yet we're in Los Angeles because you are running for mayor.
That's right.
Why? Why leave Congress?
I made a very difficult decision to not run for re-election because of the crisis in my hometown. The fact that there's 3 or more people who die a day on our streets because they are unhoused. So in our city, to have 40,000 people unhoused, living in tents all around the city, and people dying because of that was enough to bring me home.
But homelessness has been an issue in Los Angeles, in America, for decades. What is it about this time that makes it a crisis, really?
Well, over the last couple of years, it's really metastasized. So, I remember homelessness really becoming a problem. Actually, it was 30 years ago, but the numbers were so much smaller. To have 40,000 people on the streets, and then what's even scarier are the number of people who any day could become homeless, especially once the COVID safety net is gone. And then the thing that is frightening to me is that there is a level of anger in our city. People are tired. They're upset with local elected officials who they feel haven't done enough. Maybe that's fair, maybe it's not. But they are angry, and some people are now beginning to feel like they just want to see these people out of their neighborhood and don't really care what happens to them. And so health crisis, it's a humanitarian crisis, and it's because of social and economic problems that in our city, where our city has become virtually unaffordable.
Why is it that people are going, you just said a moment ago, any second people could become unhoused? What is driving that? Well,
a few things. And I do think some people describe the population that's unhoused as though it's a monolith. And it's not. Because the price of housing is so expensive here, a lot of people are living multiple families in one house. And so we have to deal with affordability. We have to deal with profound income inequality. But then you have to look at the population that's unhoused differently.
All right. So then the big question now hanging over all this is, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to solve the homelessness crisis, humanitarian crisis, while at the same time addressing the anger that is out there?
Well, I think the best way to resolve the anger is to show people that there is actually a solution, but also to get everybody involved. So in other words, if you view this problem as going to be solved by a mayor, 15 members of the city council, 5 members of the board of supervisors, it's not the case. It's going to take everybody in the city being invested in their neighbors, their neighbors who live inside and their neighbors who live outside.
Do you have a plan?
Yes, we do have a plan. One of the aspects of the plan is really looking at this as a crisis and declaring an emergency. So in other words, one of the things that has been done by our city council and our board of supervisors is they passed bond measures, billions of dollars to build housing, but they weren't able to build it fast enough. Why? Because there's so many bureaucratic hurdles. And I believe that those bureaucratic hurdles can be overcome. And I think viewing it as an emergency is one way to do that. So I want to look for the red tape and cut it. And it's an interesting thing because the county of Los Angeles has 88 cities. It is so easy to build in other cities, but when it comes to the city of Los Angeles, it's difficult to build, and developers complain about it all the time. So what is it about another city that's a few blocks away where you can build, and Los Angeles where you can't? So it's red tape that's crying out to be cut.
What about the notion of other cities within LA County pushing the homeless out of their towns and pushing them into greater Los Angeles? Is there anything you can do about that?
Well, one of the myths about the unhoused population is that they come from elsewhere. But you will find in many neighborhoods, people who are living in alleys or living outside actually lived on the street before, inside. And so there is certainly an element of people who are coming from different cities and different states, but it's a pretty small minority of folks. But I think, again, it's important to look at the different categories of people that are unhoused. So you have people that are unhoused for economic reasons, people who literally work full-time or go to school full-time, and they're living in their cars or they're living in tents. You have people who have problems with mental illness, substance abuse. You have people who were formerly incarcerated, but, you know, our harsh sentencing laws locked people up for extreme amounts of time and then passed laws that continue to punish them once they got out. So they can't get a job, they can't get a place to live, they can't get a car because of laws that were passed. Those need to be changed. You have former foster youth. So I think it's really important for people to understand who the unhoused population is and that there is a solution. And I think that's the best way to deal with the anger.
You're leaving Congress. You're leaving Congress to run for mayor of Los Angeles. And some would say it's coming conveniently in a moment when it is looking like the Democrats are going to be out of the majority after the 2022 midterm elections. Should anyone read that as the overriding issue of why you're leaving Congress?
No, honestly not. You know, and I think people view elected officials like there's always some agenda that is not the one that's actually being stated. But it really isn't true. What is bringing me home is the crisis. And frankly, you know, it was a hard decision to decide to leave Congress because I get to work on issues that are very important to me. And frankly, the way I've been trying to address the homeless situation while I'm in D.C. is from a prevention point of view. So that is why I focus on foster youth. It is why I focus on people who've been incarcerated. Because if I can provide services for them when they leave those systems, then that will help reduce the population that's unhoused.
When you were Speaker of the California Assembly, you were the first Black woman to head a state legislature in the country. But if you become mayor of Los Angeles, you'll be the first Black woman mayor of Los Angeles, but you won't be the first Black woman mayor of a U.S. city. You'll join a whole list of Black women who are currently serving, including Mayor London Breed in San Francisco. What would that mean to you if you become mayor?
Well, first of all, I will be glad that I will not be the first Black woman mayor in the United States. But I would be so honored to join that club. And believe me, I'll be on the phone to all of them.
Your daughter, Amelia Wright, and her husband, Michael Wright, were killed in a car crash in 2006. You don't talk about them much publicly, but I know that they are never apart from you.
Never.
What do you think she, Amelia, and Michael would be saying to you right now as you're undertaking this race?
No, I think that they would both be very excited and be on the campaign trail right with me, like their siblings are. I think they would be very excited.
Congresswoman Karen Bass, former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, former Speaker of the California Assembly, former seriously vetted candidate for vice president of the United States and current candidate for mayor of Los Angeles. Thank you very, very much for coming back to the Sunday Show.
Absolutely.
And thank you again to Congresswoman Karen Bass. Coming up, the death toll continues to grow following catastrophic tornadoes in the